It didn't begin with a bang. There was no explosion of pyrotechnics, no dramatic entrance music. It began with the sterile digital whisper of a corporate press release. The announcement landed on the internet with all the grace of a dropped anvil. WWE is proud to announce a collaboration with martial arts legend Steven Seagal, who will serve as a special guest trainer and consultant. The mockery was not just immediate. It was a tidal wave. Social media became a canvas for ridicule. Memes flooded every platform. Seagal sitting in a chair, pointing with detached authority. Seagal's face photoshopped onto cinematic villains and cartoon characters. Fans, pundits, and critics alike decried it as the most desperate publicity stunt in a decade of desperate publicity stunts. In the locker room, the young lions of the WWE, the new generation, just laughed. To them, he was a relic, a ghost from a forgotten era of action movies, a living punchline. They saw an old man coasting on a faded reputation. They had no idea they were laughing at a loaded gun. The WWE Performance Center in Orlando, Florida, is a modern-day forge of the gods. A place where the next generation of superathletes is hammered into shape by sweat, steel, and ruthless ambition. But on this humid Tuesday morning, the air was thick with something else: contempt. A current of ridicule flowed just beneath the surface of the day's work. They were all waiting. By the main ring, Austin Theory, the very personification of modern wrestling arrogance, was holding court. His phone was a glowing beacon of disrespect in his hand as he scrolled through the latest barrage of memes. "Look at this one," he snickered to his acolytes, a small group of equally smug prospects. They put his face on the old folk scooter from that South Park episode. The laughter was loud, sharp, and utterly disrespectful. And that's when the main training room door slid open. A silence fell over the facility, a quiet so thick and heavy it felt like a physical weight. Steven Seagal had arrived. He wore a simple black silk shirt, black jeans, and his signature yellow-tinted sunglasses. He didn't walk. He glided into the room, a phantom of quiet intensity. The laughter died in their throats, strangled by a tense, awkward stillness. The legend was here, and nobody knew what to do with him. The first training session was a catastrophe. Paul Triple H Levesque himself, the architect of this new era, made the introduction. He stood mid-ring with Seagal, his own formidable presence used to shield the guest. "Listen up," he commanded, his voice booming through the facility. "This man is a 7th Dan black belt in Aikido. He was the first foreigner to operate an Aikido dojo in Japan. He understands leverage, momentum, and control in ways none of you can possibly imagine. Listen to him. Learn from him." But they didn't listen. Seagal began to speak, his voice soft, almost a whisper, discussing the core philosophy of redirecting an opponent's own energy against them. From the front row, Austin Theory smirked and cupped a hand to his ear. "What was that, Pops? We can't hear you back here." A few of the younger wrestlers snickered, emboldened by the star's audacity. Seagal stopped talking. He didn't raise his voice. He simply stood there, his face an unreadable mask behind the tinted lenses, and stared into the crowd of athletes. The silence stretched, growing more intimidating than any shout could ever be. But Theory, high on his own bravado and feeding off his audience, pushed it further. He began to mimic Seagal's movements, but as a grotesque parody, stiff, clumsy, and wildly exaggerated. "Am I doing it right, Mr. Miyagi?" he jeered. The laughter grew. Seagal remained still. Seagal didn't answer. He didn't even seem to register the insult. He just watched. His mind was not in a ring in Orlando. It was somewhere else entirely, a place of profound discipline and absolute consequence. He was remembering the smell of aging tatami mats and the faint aroma of incense in his dojo in Osaka. He remembered the rigid hierarchy, the unspoken laws of respect, the absolute, unwavering focus required to even step on those mats. He heard the sound of bodies hitting the floor, not with a crash, but with a silent, respectful thud of defeat. He was remembering his own journey as the outsider, the Gaijin, who earned his place not with words or bravado, but with a level of skill so undeniable, so pure, it was almost frightening. He was recalling the core tenet of his entire life's training. A martial artist's spirit is forged in silence and demonstrated with absolute economy of motion. Words were a weakness. Emotional reaction was a weakness. He had built his life, his legend, on the principle of non-resistance, of letting the opponent's aggression become their own undoing. And as Austin Theory pranced and preened, Seagal saw not an opponent, but just energy loud, unfocused, arrogant, and desperate. An energy that, if left to its own devices, would soon consume itself. His inner monologue was a calm, quiet mantra against the rising tide of noise. They forgot who I was. They see an old man. They don't see the path I walked to become him. The disrespect was not confined to the training ring. It bled into the hallways, poisoning the very atmosphere of the building. Later that day, as Seagal was walking down a main corridor, Theory and his entourage accidentally bumped into him. It was a clumsy, deliberate act. A full, large cup of soda flew from Theory's hand, drenching the front of Seagal's immaculate black silk jacket. "Whoa, watch out, old-timer." Theory laughed, not even bothering to offer a hint of an apology as he and his friends walked away, exchanging high fives. Seagal didn't flinch. He didn't curse. He didn't wipe away the sticky, dripping liquid. He simply stood there for a long moment, the soda dripping onto the polished concrete floor, his presence a dark, silent question mark in the middle of the busy hallway. Other wrestlers saw it happen. Veterans like Sheamus and Bobby Lashley watched from a distance, their faces grim, a silent understanding passing between them. They knew a sacred line had been crossed. You don't disrespect a man like that, not in their world, regardless of his age or relevance. The pressure in the building was becoming unbearable. The young guns saw it as a joke to get themselves over. The veterans saw it as a lit fuse on a bomb of unknown power. For WE management, this simmering conflict wasn't a problem. It was content. It was ratings gold. That week on Monday Night Raw, they booked a must-see in-ring segment, The Grayson Waller Effect, with special guests Austin Theory and Steven Seagal. Waller, a talk show host with a Ph.D. in televised provocation, spent the first 5 minutes fawning over Theory, praising his limitless potential. He then turned to Seagal, who sat on a plush leather couch, perfectly still, a silent icon amidst the circus. "So, Steven," Waller began, his voice dripping with condescending smarm, "it's great to have you. Huge fan. My dad, he loved Under Siege." The live crowd laughed on cue. "But let's be honest, mate, this isn't Hollywood in the 90s. This is the big time. These are elite, world-class athletes. What can you really teach a future Hall of Famer, a certified megastar like Austin Theory?" Theory leaped to his feet, snatching the microphone. "Yeah, what can you teach me, huh? How to do this?" He struck a comically bad martial arts pose, then did the infamous stiff-legged run from Seagal's later films. The arena roared with laughter. Theory got right in Seagal's face, their noses inches apart. "You're washed up. You're a joke. You got nothing." As Austin Theory's spit flew with his angry words, the world around Steven Seagal seemed to slow down. The roar of the 20,000-strong crowd, the blindingly bright lights. Grayson Waller's smug face had all faded into a muffled, distant hum. His mind retreated again, not to the quiet dojo, but to a brutal demonstration years ago. A crowded room. 3 larger men, all experts in their own right, all advancing at once to test the American. He remembered his master's voice, a whisper from his early days in Japan. Do not fight the force. Become a part of it. A rock does not stop a river. It only reveals the river's true path. Let the river flow around you. In his mind's eye, he saw the attack unfold in perfect clarity. The first man's lunging punch, the way he blended with it, the almost invisible wrist lock that used the man's own forward momentum to throw him violently into the second attacker. The third man, seeing his partners fall in a heap, hesitated. That hesitation was the end. It was always the end. The principle was brutally simple. Let them provide the energy for their own destruction. He returned to the present, to the screaming, contorted face of Austin Theory. The lesson was about to be taught again. Theory, incandescent with fury at Seagal's complete and utter lack of reaction, shoved him hard. Seagal, caught off balance on the soft couch, was pushed back into the cushions. "Say something," Theory screamed, his voice cracking. He turned to the crowd, arms raised in triumph, soaking in the mix of jeers and cheers. It was the opening. As Theory postured, Grayson Waller decided to get in on the action, shoving Seagal again, this time from the side. That was the mistake. It was one thing to absorb a singular, direct attack from the front. But the second source of aggression, from the side, broke the dam of Seagal's legendary passivity. He stood up, not quickly, not with anger, but with a chilling deliberation that sent a wave of cold through the arena. The atmosphere changed in a heartbeat. The crowd noise, the commentary, everything seemed to drop into a low, anxious hum. Seagal's inner voice was no longer a mantra. It was a verdict. You mocked the wrong legend. He turned his head slowly, his gaze falling first on Waller, then locking back onto Theory. He stood in the center of the ring, a black-clad statue in a sea of digital noise and nervous energy. The playful, mocking atmosphere was gone, replaced by something primal and dangerous. In the back, the wrestlers who had been laughing along on the monitors were now silent, leaning in, their eyes wide. Ramang Reigns, the tribal chief, watching from his private locker room, raised a single curious eyebrow. Theory, still running hot on adrenaline, failed to sense the seismic shift. "What's the matter, old man? You finally gonna do something?" He taunted, circling his seemingly frozen opponent. Seagal's right hand began to rise. It moved with an unnatural, almost hypnotic slowness. Everyone in the building, everyone watching at home, thought he was going to throw a punch. Instead, his fingers went to the frame of his yellow-tinted sunglasses. The crowd, sensing a moment of true significance, grew quiet. You could hear the electronic hum of the arena lights, the faint whisper of air conditioning. He gently took hold of the glasses. The glasses came off. He folded them once, the distinct click of the hinge echoing in the sudden profound silence of the arena. He slipped them calmly into his shirt pocket. And then he looked at Austin Theory. For the very first time, everyone saw his eyes. They were not angry. They were not emotional. They were flat, empty, and utterly focused. It was the look of a predator that had just finished sizing up its prey and found it wanting. Theory hesitated. For the first time all night, a flicker of genuine doubt, of fear, crossed his handsome face. He threw a wild telegraphed haymaker, a desperate attempt to reclaim control. What happened next wasn't a fight. It was a lesson in physics. Seagal moved less than a foot, his body flowing around the punch like smoke. His hand intercepted Theory's wrist, his other hand found the elbow. It was a single, fluid, circular motion. Redirect. Theory's own forward momentum became a fulcrum. He was launched, his feet leaving the mat as if pulled by an invisible wire, and he crashed violently into Grayson Waller, sending both men tumbling in a chaotic heap into the corner turnbuckles. Theory scrambled to his feet, his face a mask of pure shock and incandescent rage. He charged, a blind, furious tackle, all technique abandoned for raw aggression. Seagal didn't retreat. He took one small, precise step to the side as his hand shot out, striking Theory's collarbone with a short, sharp impact. It wasn't a punch. It was an Atemi strike, a perfectly placed blow designed to disrupt balance and overload the central nervous system. Theory's legs buckled instantly. As he stumbled forward, completely disoriented, Seagal used a simple hip throw, a fundamental technique executed with sublime perfection. The arrogant young superstar was sent sailing effortlessly over the top rope, landing in a crumpled heap on the floor below. The arena was dead silent for 3 full seconds. Then it erupted, not with boos, not with cheers, but with a roar of pure, unadulterated shock. In the ring, Grayson Waller was painfully pulling himself up, a look of abject terror on his face. Seagal hadn't moved from his spot in the center of the canvas. He turned his flat, merciless gaze to Waller. Waller froze, his eyes wide, then slowly raised his hands in a gesture of absolute surrender and scrambled out of the ring as fast as his body would allow. Seagal stood alone. He hadn't broken a sweat. He hadn't changed his expression. A microphone lay on the mat near his feet. He bent down, picked it up, and brought it to his lips. The entire building, the entire world watching, held its breath. He said 2 words. "I don't pretend." Then he let the mic drop to the mat with a thud that echoed like a gunshot. The next day, WWE stock saw a notable bump. The clip of the incident had amassed over 50 million views across all social media platforms within 24 hours. The narrative had been rewritten in 30 seconds of brutal efficiency. Steven Seagal was no longer a joke. He was the most compelling and dangerous character in the entire company. Backstage, the atmosphere was transformed. The young wrestlers who had mocked him now avoided his gaze, their whispers silenced. The veterans, the men who understood the code, nodded with a grim, knowing respect. A match was inevitably made for the upcoming pay-per-view, Austin Theory versus Steven Seagal. But the question on everyone's mind was no longer about who would win. The question was, what would be left of Austin Theory when it was over? The world had laughed at the legend's return. They weren't laughing anymore. They were watching. They were waiting. And they were afraid. What happens when a myth becomes a man, and that man steps into your reality? You're about to find out.